Close your eyes for a moment and let the world you know fade away. Let the hum of modernity grow quiet, the glare of electric lights soften into darkness, and the solid structures of our cities dissolve into the air. We are traveling now, not across space, but across a vast ocean of time, back through the countless generations that separate us from our deepest past. Our destination is not a place on any modern map, but a state of being, a chapter in the human story that is both profoundly foreign and intimately familiar. We are journeying to 10,000 years before the Common Era, to a world untouched by plowed fields, unmarked by stone walls, and silent but for the sounds of the natural world and the small, resilient communities of humankind. This was a world on the cusp of momentous change, yet utterly unaware of the revolution to come. The great ice sheets of the last glacial period, which had once sprawled across continents, locking away vast quantities of water, had been in retreat for millennia. Their withdrawal sculpted the landscape we would recognize today, filling river valleys, carving out great lakes, and revealing new lands ripe for life. The climate, once harsh and unpredictable, was settling into a new stability, a warmth and relative predictability that would allow for a new experiment in human living. But on the eve of this change, humanity lived in a way that had been perfected over hundreds of thousands of years, a way of life that was about to be forever transformed. This is the story of that world. It is the story of the long afternoon of humanity's hunter-gatherer existence, a period that constitutes over 99% of our species' history. It is a narrative not of kings and empires, of monuments and written laws, but of small family bands and larger tribal groups, of intimate knowledge and daily survival, of a relationship with the earth that was both direct and deeply spiritual. We often call this time the Stone Age, a label that can sound primitive and simplistic, but as we will discover, it was an age of immense complexity, profound intelligence, and rich cultural expression. To understand this world, we must first shed the assumptions of our own. We must imagine a planet with a human population that was incredibly sparse, perhaps only 5 million people in all the world. To put that number in perspective, that is fewer people than currently live in the city of Madrid or Nairobi alone. These 5 million souls were not concentrated in great hubs, but were dispersed across the continents, from the warm savannas of Africa to the frigid tundra of Europe, from the dense forests of Asia to the emerging landscapes of the Americas. They lived in small, mobile groups, their lives dictated by the rhythms of migration, the availability of game, and the seasonal cycles of plants. The world they inhabited was one of immense abundance and terrifying scarcity. It was a world where knowledge was the most valuable currency, knowledge of which plants were nutritious and which were poisonous, knowledge of animal behavior, of weather patterns, of the subtle signs that marked a freshwater spring or a deposit of fine flint for tool-making. This knowledge was not written down. It was carried in memory, taught through story, song, and demonstration, and passed with immense care from one generation to the next. It was the accumulated wisdom of millennia, the toolkit that allowed our ancestors not just to survive, but to thrive and populate the globe. In the chapters that follow, we will immerse ourselves in their daily experience. We will walk with a small band through a day in their life, from the first light of dawn to the gathering round the fire under a canopy of stars untouched by light pollution. We will explore how they procured their food, becoming masters of the hunt and discerning gatherers, attuned to every detail of their environment. We will delve into the spiritual world that permeated their existence, a world where every animal, rock, and stream could hold spirit and meaning, and where shamans acted as bridges between the physical and the unseen. We will witness their artistic expressions, from the breathtaking cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira to the delicate carvings and personal adornments that speak of a need for beauty and symbolism. We will also examine the social fabric of these communities. Without formal governments, laws, or standing armies, how did they maintain order and cohesion? How did they raise their children, care for their sick and elderly, and resolve conflicts? The answers reveal a sophisticated understanding of human nature and community dynamics that relied on kinship, reciprocity, and shared belief. Finally, we will come to understand the seeds of change that were already present in this world. We will see how a changing climate and a growing familiarity with the plants and animals around them set the stage for the most fundamental shift in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. This was the slow transition from foraging to farming, from a life of movement to a life of settlement. a change that would ultimately give rise to the first villages, then towns, and then the first cities, forever altering humanity's path. But that is a story for later. For now, let us settle into this ancient time. Let us push our minds back through the centuries and try to see the world through their eyes, to hear it with their ears, and to feel the textures of a life lived in direct conversation with the earth. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and the deep, enduring human spirit that laid the foundation for everything that was to come. So let us begin our journey to a time before the first cities, to the dawn of our world. To truly understand the lives of our ancestors, we must first paint a picture of the world they inhabited. The Earth of 10,000 BCE was, in its fundamental physics and biology, the same planet we call home today. The same sun rose in the east, the same moon pulled at the tides, and the same stars wheeled across the night sky. But the canvas upon which these constants played out was dramatically different. The retreat of the glaciers had recently reshaped the continents, and the human footprint upon the land was so faint as to be almost invisible. This was a world of profound wilderness, a planet still largely owned by nature. In the north, the Great Laurentide Ice Sheet, a colossal dome of ice that had once buried much of North America under 2 miles of solid frost, was in a state of rapid collapse. Its meltwater was filling vast basins, creating the Great Lakes in its wake and sending tremendous floods scouring down the Mississippi River Valley. To the west, the Cordillon Ice Sheet was also receding, opening up new corridors and valleys. The continent was a patchwork of emerging ecosystems. Vast stretches of cold, open spruce and pine forests in the north, giving way to rich deciduous woodlands further south, and expansive grasslands teeming with life in the interior. The coastlines were different. So much water was still locked away in the remaining ice that the sea level was over 100 meters lower than it is today. What we now know as the North Sea was dry land, a great plain known as Doggerland, connecting the British Isles to mainland Europe. Similarly, a land bridge named Beringia connected Siberia to Alaska, a broad, windswept expanse of tundra and steppe that served as a highway for people, animals, and plants. Across the Atlantic, Europe was a continent in flux. The Alpine ice caps were shrinking, and the Scandinavian ice sheet was pulling back, its weight having depressed the land so that the Baltic Sea was a giant freshwater lake, soon to be breached by the rising Atlantic. Much of Central and Northern Europe was covered in a mosaic of open parkland, cold steppes, and birch and pine forests. It was a world megafauna of creatures that seemed to belong to the realm of legend. The woolly mammoth, with its great curved tusks and shaggy coat, the woolly rhinoceros, a formidable browser, and giant elk known as Irish elks, with antlers spanning over 3 meters from tip to tip. These animals were the pinnacle of a food web that supported small, highly adaptable bands of human hunters. Africa, the cradle of humanity, presented a different picture. The Sahara Desert, which today is a vast ocean of sand, was not a desert at all. It was a relatively green and fertile land, a savanna crisscrossed with rivers and lakes, home to herds of antelope, elephants, and giraffes. This green Sahara was a thriving ecosystem and a corridor for human movement. Further south, the grasslands and forests of sub-Saharan Africa teemed with the animals we now associate with the continent, and human populations were diverse, having adapted to every environment from the dense Congo rainforest to the open savannas of the Serengeti. In the Middle East, a region known as the Levant encompassing modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria was a particularly fortunate zone. It sat at the crossroads of continents and enjoyed a Mediterranean climate of wet winters and hot, dry summers. Here, the retreat of the Ice Age had created an environment of extraordinary abundance. It was home to wild stands of wheat and barley, and forests of pistachio and oak trees. Herds of gazelle, wild goats, and cattle migrated through its hills and valleys. This region, so rich in potential, was poised to become the primary stage for the great drama of the Neolithic Revolution. Asia was a continent of staggering diversity. In the Far East, along the great river valleys of the Yangtze and Yellow River, climates were warming, creating rich, forested environments. In the Indian subcontinent, monsoon patterns were establishing themselves, shaping the life cycles of the land. And in the vast steppes of Central Asia, a huge expanse of grassland supported herds of wild horses, bison, and saiga antelope, a landscape that would become the heartland of nomadic pastoralists for millennia to come. This then was the global stage, a world fresh from the ice, dynamic, and brimming with biotic potential. The air was cleaner, the rivers ran clearer, and the silence of the wilderness was broken only by the wind, the calls of animals, and the occasional voices of the small scattered groups of humans who called this world home. They were not masters of this planet, but participants in it. Their survival depended on a deep, nuanced, and intimate understanding of these environments. They knew where the water flowed, when the berries would ripen, where the deer would give birth, and where the best flint could be found for their tools. They were embedded in the web of life, their fortunes inextricably linked to the health of the land and the whims of the climate. They lived in a state of attentive belonging, and it is to the details of their daily existence that we now turn our attention. In the vast and often demanding world of 10,000 BCE, an individual alone stood little chance of long-term survival. The true unit of existence, the engine of resilience, and the repository of culture was not the person, but the group. The social fabric woven by these ancient communities was intricate, strong, and fundamentally different from the large, anonymous societies we live in today. It was a world built not on institutions, but on intimate human connection. A typical band might consist of anywhere from 20 to 50 individuals, though these numbers would fluctuate with the seasons and the availability of resources. This was not a random gathering of people. It was almost always a web of extended family. At its core were grandparents, their children, and their children's children. Cousins were as close as siblings, and the lines between nuclear families were beautifully blurred. This kinship structure was the primary organizing principle of life. It dictated who one lived with, hunted with, and shared food with. It defined responsibilities and offered a clear, unquestioned place of belonging for every individual from birth to death. Within this structure, social roles were often fluid and based on capability rather than rigid gender divisions, though certain general patterns emerged across many groups. The work of men often involved the high-risk, high-reward activities of hunting large game. This required profound strength, stamina, and coordinated group strategy. It was dangerous work. A single misstep with a mammoth or an aurochs could mean severe injury or death. But the success of a hunt could feed the entire band for days. The work of women, while often less dramatized, was the relentless and essential engine of daily caloric intake. Gathering was a complex science. Women were master botanists, possessing encyclopedic knowledge of hundreds of plant species. They knew which roots were edible, which berries were ripe, which leaves could be used for medicine, and which nuts could be stored for the winter. This gathering provided the majority of the band's food, and was a stable, reliable source of nutrition. They also were often responsible for the incredibly sophisticated task of processing and preparing food, making tools like baskets and grinding stones, and of course, the bearing and raising of children. The children learned by doing, accompanying their parents from a very young age, playing with miniature tools, and gradually taking on more responsibility as they grew. But to imagine these groups as strictly patriarchal or matriarchal is to impose a modern lens. Decision-making was often consensus-based. The most experienced hunters, the most knowledgeable gatherers, and the most respected elders, both male and female, would have their opinions heard. A skilled huntress or a wise old man might hold significant influence. Leadership was situational. The best navigator might lead the group on a journey, the best tracker would lead the hunt, and the individual with the deepest spiritual connection might lead a ceremony. The glue that held this social structure together was reciprocity. The concept of private property, in the modern sense, was virtually non-existent. Food was shared. A successful hunter did not keep his kill for his immediate family. It was distributed throughout the band. This was not naive altruism. It was a brilliant survival strategy. By giving freely today, he ensured that he and his family would be fed tomorrow by the success of others. This created a system of mutual obligation and insurance against misfortune. Tools, knowledge, and shelter were also shared commodities. This profound level of cooperation minimized risk and ensured the well-being of the group as a whole. Conflict was not absent, but it was managed very differently. Without a police force or a system of courts, social harmony was maintained through gossip, ridicule, and the immense pressure of group opinion. In a small band where everyone knew everyone else, social disapproval was a powerful deterrent. In cases of serious dispute, the group might mediate, or the conflict might be resolved by one party simply leaving to join a neighboring band. an option made possible by extensive kinship networks that spread across territories. The band was not an isolated unit. They were part of a larger tribal identity, a network of bands that shared a common language, common myths, and common ancestors. Several times a year, especially during periods of seasonal abundance, these separate bands would come together. These gatherings were momentous occasions, a time for celebrating, trading, sharing news, arranging marriages, and performing communal rituals. For the young, it was a chance to find a partner from outside their immediate family. For everyone, it reinforced a sense of identity that was larger than their small, mobile band. It was a time to renew the social contracts that bound them all together, to feel part of something vast and meaningful. This delicate balance of intimate band life and larger tribal connection formed the complete social world of our ancestors. A world where every face was familiar and every individual had a vital role to play. Let us now narrow our focus from the grand scale of continents and social structures to the intimate rhythm of a single day. Imagine the first faint glow of light seeping into a deep blue sky, the horizon beginning to distinguish itself from the land. The world is hushed, holding its breath. The air is cool and carries the damp, rich scent of earth and vegetation. Somewhere, a bird tentatively offers its first call of the day. This is how a day began for our ancestors in 10,000 BCE. Not with an alarm, but with the gradual, inevitable awakening of the natural world. The band's camp is not a village. It is a temporary home, a collection of simple, durable shelters. These might be sturdy huts made of mammoth bones and hides in the colder north, or lighter structures of woven branches and animal skins in more temperate zones. The remains of last night's fire smolder in a central hearth, a thin wisp of smoke rising into the still air. The first to stir are the adults. There is a quiet, unspoken urgency to their movements. The day's work begins now, for daylight is the most precious resource they have. The first task is to revive the fire. A designated firekeeper, often an elder whose knowledge is paramount, carefully nurses the embers, adding dry grass and tiny twigs until a small flame licks up, then larger sticks. The fire is life. It provides warmth against the morning chill. It will cook the day's food, and it offers protection. Its crackling presence is a constant, comforting sound in the camp. As the fire grows, others begin to rise. There are no elaborate morning routines. People stretch, drink water from a nearby stream carried in skin bags, and gather around the fire's warmth. The conversation is low and purposeful. The plans for the day are discussed. The band must split into smaller groups today. The decision is made by consensus, based on the season and their needs. A group of the most skilled hunters, both men and women, will set out to track a herd of reindeer known to be grazing in a valley to the east. They check their tools with a practiced eye, spears with carefully chipped flint points, atlatl spear throwers that extend the range and power of their throw on sharp stone knives. Their movements are economical, practiced, silent. Another group, primarily the gatherers, will forage in the forests to the west. They are the ones with the deepest botanical knowledge. They sling expertly woven baskets on their backs and carry digging sticks to pry up roots. They know that this is the time of year when a particular tuber is at its sweetest, and that the stand of hazel trees a few hours walk away will be dropping its nuts. Children who are old enough to keep up but too young for the hunt will accompany them, their sharp eyes perfect for spotting mushrooms or birds' nests. The very young, the elderly, and perhaps a few adults who are crafting new tools or treating hides will remain in camp. The camp is not idle. It is a hive of industry. One person sits by the fire, patiently chipping away at a core of flint. With precise strikes, they flake off shards, shaping a perfect, razor-sharp projectile point. Every strike has purpose. Even the waste flakes can be used as small cutting tools. Nothing is wasted. Another works a stiff animal hide, scraping off the last bits of flesh and fat with a stone scraper, then rubbing in a mixture of animal brain and fat to soften it into supple leather. The air fills with the rhythmic sounds of stone on stone and stone on hide. Out in the forest, the gathering party moves with a focused grace. They do not wander aimlessly. They move with intent to specific known locations. Their eyes are constantly scanning the ground and the foliage. An experienced woman stops, points to a plant with broad leaves, and shows a young girl how to dig around it to extract the long, starchy root without breaking it. They taste ester berry, discussing its ripeness. The basket on her back slowly fills with a diverse bounty: roots, leafy greens, fungi, and insects like grubs and caterpillars, which are a valuable source of protein. Meanwhile, the hunting party has become a different entity. The easy chatter of camp is gone. They move with the predator's silence, their communication reduced to hand signals and glances. They are reading the story of the landscape: a broken twig here, a fresh hoofprint there, a patch of disturbed moss. They are not just looking for the animals. They are thinking like them, predicting their path, using the wind to mask their scent. The chase, when it comes, is a burst of explosive, coordinated action. It is fraught with danger and often ends in failure. But when it succeeds, it is a moment of profound triumph and relief. As the sun begins its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the groups trickle back to camp. The gatherers return first, their baskets heavy. The hunters return later, perhaps successful, perhaps not. If they have made a kill, the mood is celebratory. The large animal is butchered with expert efficiency at the edge of the camp. Every part is used: the meat, the organs, the hide, the sinew for cordage, the bones for tools. The finest cuts are placed over the fire, and the rich, smoky smell of roasting meat fills the air, a powerful, enticing aroma that promises security and satisfaction. As darkness falls, the fire becomes the heart of the universe. The entire band gathers around its warmth and light. This is the most important social time of the day. The day's stories are told: the close call on the hunt, the hidden patch of berries found by the children. Knowledge is shared and reinforced. An elder might tell the old stories, the myths of how the world began, how the stars were placed in the sky, the adventures of the first people who were both human and animal. These stories are not mere entertainment. They are the sacred texts, the history books, and the moral guides of the people. Someone might take out a flute carved from a bird bone and play a simple, haunting melody. The day's stresses fade into the comfort of community. Eventually, the conversations dwindle. The fire burns down to a bed of glowing embers. The sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of a wolf become louder. People retreat to their shelters, wrapped in furs, sleeping close together for warmth and safety. The camp is silent again, under a breathtaking canopy of stars, infinitely brighter than any we can see today. The day is done. They have faced its challenges together, and they have survived. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again, and the rhythm will continue. A timeless dance of survival, community, and deep connection to the living world. The daily life of our ancestors was a constant dialogue with the physical world, finding food, making tools, seeking shelter. But to believe their world was only material would be to misunderstand them completely. Their reality was dual-layered, encompassing both the visible, tangible realm and a powerful, pervasive, unseen world. This spiritual dimension was not a separate part of life. It was woven into the very fabric of existence, informing every action, from the hunt to the gathering of a simple root. For these ancient peoples, the world was alive with spirit. This concept, known as animism, was the foundational layer of their belief system. It was not a formal religion with holy books or centralized clergy, but a visceral, intuitive understanding of the universe. In their eyes, consciousness and personhood were not exclusive to humans. A towering oak tree possessed a spirit and a wisdom of its own. The river that provided water and life had a will. It could be generous or treacherous. The mammoth was not just a source of meat and ivory. It was a powerful, noble being, deserving of respect. Even seemingly inanimate objects, like a particularly fine piece of flint that crafted a perfect spear point, could hold an essence or a power that demanded acknowledgement. This worldview created a relationship with nature that was based on reciprocity and respect, not domination. One did not simply take from the world. One engaged with it. Before a hunt, there might be rituals and prayers to ask permission from the spirit of the animal. After a successful kill, there were often ceremonies of thanks, apologies for the taking of life, and practices to ensure the animal's spirit would be reborn and allow itself to be hunted again. A gatherer might offer a song of gratitude to a plant before harvesting its roots, ensuring its spirit would remain strong and the patch would continue to be fertile. This was a practical spirituality. By maintaining a good relationship with the spirit world, they ensured the continued abundance of the resources they depended on. The bridge between the human community and this unseen spirit world was the shaman. This figure, man or woman, was not a ruler, but a revered spiritual specialist. They were individuals set apart, often from a young age, by unique traits perhaps, a propensity for vivid dreams, visions, or epileptic seizures, which were interpreted not as illness but as a sign of a spirit calling. The shaman's role was to journey into the spirit realm to accomplish tasks vital for the band's survival. In a trance state, induced by rhythmic drumming, dancing, chanting, or sometimes the use of psychoactive plants, the shaman's spirit was believed to leave their body. On these journeys, the shaman might seek to divine the location of migrating game herds, bargaining with the spirit of the reindeer or the bison to guide them to the hunters. They might work to heal a sick person by battling malevolent spirits or retrieving a lost soul. They might intercede with the spirits of the weather to bring rain during a drought or to calm a violent storm. The shaman was the group's guide, healer, and psychopompher, one who could navigate the mysteries of life, death, and the cosmos for the benefit of all. This rich inner life found magnificent expression in art. Deep within limestone caves, far from the light of day, they created some of the most breathtaking art the world has ever known. Places like Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain were not homes. They were likely sacred sanctuaries, perhaps the very portals the shaman used to access the spirit world. By the flickering light of animal fat lamps, they painted stunningly realistic and dynamic images of the animals they relied upon and revered. Bison, horses, aurochs, and stags. These paintings were far more than simple depictions. They were likely acts of magic and power. By painting the animal, perhaps they believed they were capturing its spirit, ensuring a successful hunt. The images often show animals pierced with spears, or pregnant, symbolizing a desire not just to kill but for the species to multiply and thrive. The act of creating art in such difficult, dangerous places was itself a spiritual undertaking, a communion with the deep, ancient powers of the earth. This spiritual mindset answered the profound human questions of existence. It provided explanations for the mysteries of life and death, for the patterns of the seasons, for the origins of the world. It offered comfort in the face of danger and loss, and it created a powerful ethical code that governed how one should interact with all other beings, human and non-human alike. It was a worldview of profound connection, reminding every individual that they were part of a vast, living, conscious cosmos, with a role to play and responsibilities to uphold. This deep, spiritual intelligence was as crucial to their survival as any tool they crafted or any hunt they undertook. To survive and thrive in the Pleistocene world, our ancestors could not rely on strength or speed alone. Their true advantage, the key that unlocked every environment from the Arctic Circle to the African savanna, was their ingenuity. They were master technologists, and their primary medium was stone. The term Stone Age can evoke an image of primitive simplicity, but nothing could be further from the truth. The technology of 10,000 BCE was a testament to sophisticated knowledge, precise skill, and a deep understanding of the materials provided by the earth. The most important raw material was fine-grained, predictable stone. Flint and chert were prized above all for their conchoidal fracture property, meaning they could be broken in a controlled way to produce flakes with edges sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, provided the sharpest edge of all. But obtaining these materials was not a matter of chance. Groups knew the locations of prime quarries and outcrops, often traveling great distances or trading with other bands to acquire them. This knowledge of geology was the first critical step in the technological chain. The process of tool-making was a skilled craft, often performed by specialists within the band whose steady hands and keen eyes were renowned. The primary method was knapping, the art of striking one stone with another, or using a softer hammer of antler or hard wood to press off flakes. There were two main categories of tools: cores and flakes. A core was a larger stone that was carefully shaped through the removal of flakes. A well-prepared core itself could be a tool, like a hand axe for chopping or scraping. But the real versatility came from the flakes themselves. Each strike produced a flake with a razor-sharp edge, a ready-made knife, scraper, or cutter that could be used immediately and then discarded. Over millennia, they developed an incredible array of specialized tools, each with a precise function. There were projectile points, meticulously shaped and thinned. These were hafted onto spears. The invention of the otlot, or spear thrower, was a revolutionary advancement. This wooden device acted as an extension of the arm, leveraging greater force and distance, making hunting larger, more dangerous game far more effective. Scrapers, essential for processing animal hides. Different scrapers were used for removing flesh and fat, thinning the hide, and softening it into supple leather for clothing. Shelters and containers. Burins, chisel-like tools made from a robust flake, used for working bone and antler. With a burin they could engrave, groove, and shape these materials into needles, awls, fishhooks, and barbed points. Blades, long parallel-sided flakes that were incredibly efficient cutting tools, much like the blades in a modern utility knife, but their technology extended far beyond stone. The organic part of their toolkit, which survives far less often in the archaeological record, was just as vital. Bone and antler were worked into harpoons for fishing, spear points, and the crucial tools used for knapping stone itself. Wood was fashioned into spears, digging sticks, bowls, and the shafts for composite tools. Perhaps one of their most understated inventions was cordage. Using fibers from plants, sinew from animals, and even human hair, they learned to twist and weave strong cord and rope. This was the technology that allowed them to haft a stone point to a wooden spear to weave nets for catching fish and small game, and to create the first containers, bags, and baskets that freed their hands for other tasks and allowed for the transport and storage of food. This knowledge was not static. It was adapted with breathtaking creativity to every environment they encountered. On the coasts, they developed complex fishhooks and harpoons. In the frozen north, they engineered needles precise enough to sew tailored, weatherproof clothing from furs, an innovation that was absolutely critical for survival. They began to understand the properties of different materials, how to use heat to treat stone for better flaking, and how to combine materials to make composite tools that were greater than the sum of their parts. The toolkit of 10,000 BCE was the culmination of over 2 million years of technological experimentation and refinement. It was a perfect adaptation to a mobile, foraging lifestyle, lightweight, versatile, repairable, and made from materials readily available in the environment. Each tool represented a chain of knowledge: where to find the stone, how to strike it, how to haft it, and how to use it. This knowledge, passed down through endless generations of careful teaching and imitation, was their true inheritance. It was the physical expression of human intelligence, an intelligence that was about to be directed toward a new, revolutionary purpose, not just harvesting the world, but changing it. For hundreds of thousands of years, the rhythm of human life had been one of movement and harvesting. The world was a given, a landscape of abundance to be navigated and understood, but not fundamentally altered. Yet, by 10,000 BCE, in the wake of the retreating ice, a profound shift in consciousness was beginning to take root. It was a slow, almost imperceptible revolution in thought, a new way of seeing the relationship between humans and the plants and animals they depended upon. The seeds of the future were being sown, not in fields, but in the human mind. This cognitive shift was born from an intimacy with the natural world, so deep it verged on symbiosis. Generations of gatherers had not just collected wild grasses, they had come to understand their life cycles. They knew that if seeds fell on the disturbed, sun-warmed earth near their campsites, they would often sprout more vigorously than in the compacted soil of the wild. They began to recognize that they could encourage this process, that they could have a hand in creating conditions for growth. This was the first step toward cultivation, the realization that they could intervene in nature, not just extract from it. Similarly, their relationship with animals was evolving. The hunt was a sacred, dangerous dance with powerful beings. But there were other interactions. Young animals or ox calves, wild goat kids, wolf pups might sometimes be captured and brought back to camp. Perhaps they were initially seen as a source of fresh meat later on. But living in close proximity to these creatures fostered a new kind of relationship. They could be tended, fed, and kept. Their behavior could be observed and learned. Over time, the idea emerged that these animals could be a living larder, a source of meat, milk, blood, and hides that was more predictable than the uncertain chase. This was the dawn of herding, the idea that humans could assume a role of stewardship over other species. The changing climate played the role of a great catalyst. As the world warmed and stabilized, certain regions became exceptionally generous. The Fertile Crescent, a broad arc of land stretching from the Levant through southeastern Anatolia and into the Zagros Mountains, was one such place. Here, the ancestors of modern wheat, Barley, lentils, and chickpeas grew in dense, abundant stands. Here, too, roamed the wild ancestors of goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle. The environment was rich with the very species most amenable to domestication. In this near-perfect laboratory, the experimental process of domestication accelerated. This was not a conscious decision to invent farming. There was no grand plan. It was a gradual series of choices and adaptations made by people who were still, at heart, hunted. A band might deliberately scatter the seeds of their favorite wild wheat near a seasonal campsite to which they returned each year. They might clear competing plants away, encouraging a denser stand to grow over generations without realizing the genetic implications they were selecting. For plants with desirable traits, ones that had bigger seeds, that held those seeds tightly on the stalk so they didn't scatter easily, a trait that would be disastrous in the wild but perfect for human harvesters. And that grew more readily in human-disturbed soil. The same process unfolded with animals. By selectively hunting, perhaps, culling more aggressive males from a herd of wild goats, and leaving the tamer ones to breed, they unconsciously began to sculpt the gene pool of the species. Animals that were less fearful, less aggressive, and perhaps smaller and more manageable were favored. This was a slow, co-evolutionary dance. The plants and animals were changing in response to human selection, and humans were changing their entire society in response to the new possibilities these altered species offered. This new mindset represented a fundamental break with the past. The old worldview was one of reciprocity with a wild, powerful world. The emerging worldview was one of management, control, and investment in a specific place. It involved a different sense of time thinking, not just about the next season, but about the next year and the year after that. It required new ways of thinking about property and territory. If you invest labor in clearing land and sowing seeds, you have a vested interest in staying to reap the harvest and defend your claim. This revolution in thought was the true genesis of the Neolithic era. The stone tools were still there, but they were being adapted for new tasks. Sickle blades set in bone handles for harvesting grain, larger grinding stones for processing it. The social structures began to strain under new pressures. The concept of storing surplus food created new possibilities for wealth, status, and, for the first time, significant inequality. The stage was being set for a change so dramatic it would affect everything from human biology to the global climate. The first, tentative steps were being taken on the path that would lead to villages, then to towns, and finally, to the first gleaming cities on the horizon. The age of belonging to the world was gradually giving way to the age of shaping it. The revolution that began as a subtle shift in thought now began to reshape the very earth beneath their feet. The period that followed, known as the Neolithic Revolution, was not a sudden event but a slow, uneven wave of change that washed over different parts of the world at different times. For the communities living in the favored lands of the Fertile Crescent around and just after 10,000 BCE, life began to transform in ways their ancestors could scarcely have imagined. The relationship between humans and their food sources was becoming direct, intentional, and fixed to a specific piece of land. The first steps toward full-fledged farming were likely a form of gardening. Around their seasonal campsites, bands began to actively cultivate the wild stands of cereals and pulses they had always gathered. They used simple digging sticks to break up the soil and stone-bladed sickles to harvest the grains. This was not yet agriculture as we know it. It was a middle ground, a supplement to the traditional hunting and gathering lifestyle. It provided a more reliable and storable food source, a buffer against lean times. But it also demanded a new kind of labor and a new sense of time. They had to protect their plots from animals and birds. They had to tend them, and they had to remain in the area long enough to reap what they had sown. This increasing investment in a specific location encouraged longer stays. Instead of abandoning a campsite when local resources were exhausted, a group might remain for many months to tend their crops. This led to the creation of more substantial and permanent dwellings. The temporary huts of hide and branch began to be replaced by structures made of mud brick, with stone foundations and plastered floors. They built storage pits lined with plaster or baskets to protect their hard-won surplus of grain from moisture and pests. For the first time, people were investing their labor not just in portable tools, but in immovable infrastructure. They were putting down roots, both literally and figuratively. Simultaneously, a parallel revolution was taking place with animals. The The process of domestication was reaching a critical point. In the Zagros Mountains, wild bees or goats were being managed. The most docile animals were kept and bred, their offspring becoming increasingly separated from their wild cousins genetically and behaviorally. Similar processes were underway with wild sheep in the hills, and later with wild pigs and cattle. This herding provided a staggering array of new resources. Animals offered a continuous supply of meat, milk, and blood. Their hides and wool provided clothing and shelter materials. Their bones and sinew were crafted into tools. Perhaps most importantly, their dung provided valuable fertilizer for the emerging fields. This new, integrated system of farming and herding created a feedback loop that accelerated scientism, the process of settling down. Reliable food production from fields and herds supported larger populations. Larger populations required more food, which necessitated more farming and larger herds. The Oldsmobile lifestyle, which had once been the only path to survival, began to seem less necessary. Why follow the migrating herds when you have your own living larder penned nearby? Why range far for nuts and berries when your fields of wheat and barley could feed you for a year? The world's first known villages began to appear. Places like Jericho in the Jordan Valley and Cataluk in Anatolia started as small, seasonal settlements. But over centuries, they grew. Jericho, with its famous spring providing a constant water source, became a permanent town, eventually surrounding itself with massive stone walls, and a towering rock-cut ditch testaments to the new need to defend accumulated wealth and resources. Cataluk grew into a sprawling, unique settlement of mud brick houses built so close together that inhabitants entered through holes in the roof. Life in these early villages was a strange amalgam of the old world and the new. They still hunted wild game and gathered wild plants, but an ever-increasing portion of their diet came from their domesticated crops and animals. Their tools were Neolithic, polished stone axes for clearing land, sickle blades for harvesting, but their art and spirituality still echoed the Paleolithic past. At Cataluk, houses were filled with artwork, murals of hunting scenes, plaster reliefs of leopards and bulls, and the buried skulls of ancestors, plastered and painted to recreate their faces, suggesting a deep, enduring reverence for the spirit world and the lineage of the family. This transition was not a straightforward improvement. Analysis of skeletal remains from these early farming communities tells a somber story. Their diets became less varied, leading to nutritional deficiencies. The hard, repetitive labor of grinding grain and tilling soil left its mark in arthritic joints and worn vertebrae. Diseases could spread more easily in denser, sedentary populations, and living in close quarters with animals led to the transfer of new zoonotic diseases. In many ways, the health of these early farmers declined compared to their hunter-gatherer forebears. Yet, for all its hardships, this new way of life was profoundly seductive. It offered the promise of security, of surplus, of a life less subject to the immediate whims of nature. It allowed for the accumulation of material goods, for larger families, and for a complexity of social organization that was impossible in a mobile band. The genie was out of the bottle. The path was chosen. The great experiment of human civilization had begun, setting humanity on a course that would forever alter the planet and the human story. The age of foraging was ending, and the age of the field, the flock, and the village was dawning. The world of 10,000 BCE, of small bands living in intimate dialogue with nature, may seem impossibly remote, a closed chapter in a book we have long since finished. But to believe this is to overlook the profound and enduring legacy of that deep past. The echoes of our hunter-gatherer ancestors resonate within us still, shaping our biology, our psychology, and the very fabric of our modern societies in ways both subtle and significant. We carry the Paleolithic within us, even as we navigate a world of concrete, steel, and digital information. Perhaps the most immediate legacy is written in our own bodies. The human form was sculpted over millions of years for a life of movement, long-distance walking, running, climbing, and the varied physical demands of hunting and gathering. Our modern propensity for back pain, obesity, and certain stress-related illnesses can be seen as a mismatch between the bodies we inherited and the sedentary, calorie-rich lives we now lead. Our eyes, adapted to focus on vast horizons and track movement across open landscapes, now strain over screens held just inches away. Our innate taste for sweet, salty, and fatty foods was a brilliant adaptation for seeking out scarce high-energy nutrients on the savanna. In a world of abundance, it becomes a health liability. We are, in a very real sense, Stone Age bodies trying to navigate a space-age world. This deep past also imprinted itself upon our minds and our social desires. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that our innate need for social belonging, our sensitivity to status and reputation within a group, and our capacity for cooperation with non-kin, all have roots in the demands of living in small, interdependent bands. The intense pleasure we derive from sharing a meal, the comfort of storytelling, the deep satisfaction of mastering a complex craft, these are echoes of the ancient rhythms of camp life. Even our modern fascination with social media can be viewed through this lens, a digital attempt to recreate the gossip and social monitoring that was essential for cohesion in a small-scale society. The spiritual worldview of our ancestors, their animistic sense of a living, conscious world, has never truly left us. It persists in our parks and gardens, our desire to bring plants into our homes and to vacation in natural settings. It underpins the modern environmental movement, a growing recognition that we are not separate from nature, but part of a fragile, interconnected system of truth that was self-evident to every human in 10,000 BC. The awe we feel gazing at a starry night sky, the peace we find walking through an old-growth forest. These are fleeting connections to a consciousness that saw the sacred in every rock and stream. The technological ingenuity, born in the Paleolithic era, is the direct ancestor of all human innovation. The methodical process of knapping a stone to assessing the raw material, planning the sequence of strikes, executing with precision, and adapting to unexpected flaws, the same cognitive process used by a modern engineer or programmer. The human capacity for problem-solving, for turning the materials of the natural world into useful objects, was honed over these countless generations. Every skyscraper, every smartphone, every satellite in orbit owes a debt to the first individual who tied a sharp stone to a stick. And what of the great transition to farming? Its consequences define our modern existence. The creation of food surplus was the prerequisite for everything that followed. Specialization of labor, social stratification, kings, priests, armies, writing, and mathematics. The notion of owning and defending a specific territory became paramount. The human population, which had remained stable for millennia, began its exponential climb. The environmental impact of humanity, once localized and minimal, began its dramatic increase, a path that has led to the climate challenges we face today. The social inequalities that first emerged with the storage of grain and the ownership of herds have magnified into the vast economic disparities of the modern world. We are living in the long shadow of the Neolithic Revolution. The story of humanity before the first cities is not a quaint prelude to the real history. It is the foundational epic of our species. It is a story of resilience, adaptability, and profound connection. It reminds us that for the vast majority of our history, we lived in a very different way, with a different set of values and a different sense of our place in the cosmos. Understanding this deep past does not mean rejecting modernity. Instead, it offers a priceless perspective. It allows us to see our current moment not as an inevitable endpoint, but as one chapter in a long and ongoing story. It helps us understand the deep-seated yearnings and conflicts within ourselves, and perhaps, by reconnecting with that ancient part of our heritage, the part that values community, craftsmanship, and the living world, we can find wisdom to navigate the complexities of the future. The fire around which our ancestors gathered still burns. We have only built vast and intricate temples around it. The embers of that ancient world are still warm, waiting for us to remember their heat. As our journey nears its end, we must resist the temptation to view the world of 10,000 BCE as merely a stepping stone to what came next. It was not an age of lack, waiting for the fulfillment of agriculture and civilization. For the people living within it, it was a complete and whole world. A way of life that had been refined to a state of elegant balance over hundreds of thousands of years. It was a long twilight, a stable and successful adaptation that represented one of the most enduringly sustainable societies humanity has ever known. This was a world governed by the logic of immediate return. Work was directed toward meeting the needs of the present day or the immediate season. There was little incentive to overexploit resources. Why hunt more game than the band could eat or preserve? The meat would spoil. Why gather more nuts than could be carried to the next camp? They would be a useless burden. This economic system inherently prevented the kind of hoarding and massive surplus that would later lead to wealth accumulation and social stratification. It was an economy of sufficiency, not excess. The concept of enough was built into the daily rhythm of life. This resulted in a profound ecological balance. The human population was kept in check, not by war or famine, but by the carrying capacity of the land. Groups moved through their territories with a deep understanding of the need to allow game populations to recover and plant resources to regenerate. Their environmental impact was minimal and localized. They shaped their environments, certainly using controlled burns to encourage new growth for grazing animals, for instance, but they did so in a way that worked with ecological cycles rather than breaking them. They were a part of the ecosystem, a keystone species perhaps, but not its master or its destroyer. The psychological landscape of this existence, while undoubtedly harsh and fraught with danger, also offered profound rewards. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, which can offer us glimpses into this past, often show that these communities enjoy significant leisure time. The procurement of food, for highly skilled and knowledgeable groups, did not require a dawn-to-dusk grind. There were hours in the day for socializing, for storytelling, for artistic creation, and for simply being. Without the need to accumulate material wealth, status was often earned through generosity, storytelling ability, hunting skill, or spiritual knowledge qualities that benefited the entire group. There was also a deep sense of freedom within the structure of band life. While bound by strong kinship ties and social obligations, individuals were not tied to a single plot of land or a life of repetitive labor. The entire world was before them. If a conflict arose that could not be resolved, one had the option to leave and join another band. The rhythm of life changed with the seasons, offering variety in intense periods of cooperative labor during a hunt or a harvest, followed by times of rest and social celebration. This variety stood in stark contrast to the monotonous sun-up to sundown agricultural labor that would come to define life for most people for the next 10 millennia. We must, therefore, let go of the evolutionary prejudice that this era was merely primitive. It was, in its own way, a pinnacle of human adaptation. It was a way of life that fostered deep environmental knowledge, resilient social structures, rich cultural and spiritual expression, and a remarkable degree of personal autonomy within a collective framework. The people of this time were not failed farmers. They were master foragers, the inheritors of an immense and successful tradition. The transition to farming and settled life was not an inevitable march of progress. It was a series of choices made by specific groups in specific environmental contexts, a path that offered new forms of security, but also introduced new forms of stress, inequality, and constraint. For a long time, the two ways of life existed side by side, with many groups likely choosing to maintain their mobile, foraging existence even as their neighbors began to settle down and till the soil. The world of the first cities did not erase the older world. It grew out of it, and for a time was surrounded by it. The rhythms of the campfire, the knowledge of the gatherer, the skill of the hunter, and the wisdom of the shaman persisted in the memory of our species. They are the bedrock upon which all else was built. As we look back from our modern, hyper-connected, and often alienated world, we can see in that deep past not a story of poverty, but one of a different kind of wealth, a wealth of time, of connection, of meaning, and of balance. It is a legacy that is not lost, but simply waiting, encoded in our very beings, to be remembered and to offer its lessons for the future. Our journey to the dawn is complete, but the echoes of that dawn will sound within us for as long as humanity endures. Our journey across the vast expanse of time is complete. We have walked with the people of 10,000 BCE, shared the warmth of their fires, marveled at the depth of their knowledge, and felt the spiritual weight of their world. We have witnessed the first tentative steps toward a new way of life, one that would irrevocably alter humanity's course. As we draw this narrative to a close, we are left not at an end, but at a profound beginning, the quiet, momentous dawn of the world we now inhabit. The world of hunter-gatherers did not vanish overnight. For millennia, the new agricultural villages and the old mobile bands coexisted, their ways of life often intertwining and influencing one another. Some foraging groups traded animal skins, medicinal herbs, or prized obsidian with settled farmers for grains or crafted goods. Others chose to remain apart, perhaps viewing the back-breaking labor of the fields and the crowded, disease-prone villages with suspicion, preferring the freedom and familiar rhythms of the ancestral path. The choice to settle was not a single event, but a slow, cultural tide that rose at different speeds across the globe. But the tide was indeed rising. The logic of cultivation and herding, once set in motion, possessed a powerful, self-reinforcing momentum. Surplus food allowed populations to grow, and growing populations required more surplus, which demanded more land under cultivation and larger herds. This expansion gradually began to change the physical landscape on a scale never before seen. Forests were cleared with polished stone axes, grasslands were grazed by domesticated herds, and the very composition of the earth and air began to be subtly altered by human activity. The age of humanity as a global geological force, what some scientists now call the Anthropocene, had its deepest roots in these first fields and pastures. With settlement came new concepts that would become the foundations of civilization. The idea of permanent ownership of a specific plot of land, the need to defend stored wealth, and the emergence of inherited social status. The relatively egalitarian structure of the band began to give way to more complex and hierarchical societies. Those who controlled the surplus of food gained new forms of power and influence. Specialization intensified. Not everyone needed to be involved in food production anymore. This freed individuals to become full-time potters, weavers, priests, soldiers, and chieftains. This division of labor was the engine of cultural and technological innovation, but it also carved the first deep grooves of social inequality. The spiritual world, too, began to transform. The intimate, shamanistic connection to a world alive with individual spirits began to evolve alongside the new agricultural reality. The cycles of the sky, the sun for growth, the rain for nourishment, became increasingly paramount. Deities associated with weather, crops, and fertility rose in importance. Religion began to organize itself around calendrical rituals to ensure a good harvest. And those who could intercede with these powerful forces, the priests, gained significant authority. The sacred was becoming formalized, institutionalized, and aligned with the rhythms of the sown field rather than the wild hunt. And so, the stage was set. All the elements were now in place: a stable, surplus food supply, a growing and settled population, social stratification, specialized labor, and organized religion. It was from this potent mixture that the first cities would eventually emerge. They would be the great crucibles where writing would be invented to record transactions and laws, where monumental architecture would rise to proclaim the power of gods and kings, and where the complexities of human society would explode into the vibrant, chaotic, and creative experiment we call civilization. But as we return to our own time, to the hum of our computers and the glow of our streetlights, we carry with us the memory of that older world. The age of foraging is not a forgotten prelude. It is the first and longest volume of the human story. Its lessons of community, environmental wisdom, and resilience are not obsolete. They are a part of us, etched into our DNA and our collective unconscious. The fire around which our ancestors gathered still burns. We see it in our longing for community, in our need for purpose, in the peace we find in nature, and in the stories we continue to tell each other. We have built astonishing temples of technology and culture around that fire, but the fundamental human needs for connection, meaning, and belonging remain unchanged. The people of 10,000 BCE could never have imagined our world of cities and satellites, but we, if we listen closely, can still imagine theirs. And in doing so we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, of the ancient instincts that drive us, the profound losses that have accompanied our gains, and the enduring human spirit that has navigated this incredible journey from the campfire to the stars. Their dawn has led to our day, and the long twilight of the hunters now shines its reflective light upon all we have become. As the echoes of our journey begin to fade, and the vivid images of Ice Age landscapes and flickering firelight recede into memory, there remains one final quiet truth to acknowledge. It is a whisper that comes not from the grand narrative of human progress, but from the intimate, silent spaces between the words we have shared. We have spoken of tools and hunting, of gathering and rituals, of the slow turn toward agriculture. We have charted the course of humanity's greatest transition. But beneath the surface of these events, flowing like a deep, underground river, is something more fundamental: the human heart itself. Across 12,000 years, the hopes and fears that animated the soul of a young hunter watching a distant herd, or a mother teaching her daughter which route to dig, are not foreign to us. They are instantly, painfully recognizable. The anxiety before the hunt, the fierce joy of success, the grief of loss, the comfort of a familiar voice in the darkness, the awe felt under a blanket of stars, these are the timeless currencies of human experience. The technology has changed. The scale of our societies has transformed beyond recognition, but the essential emotional landscape of being human remains remarkably constant. The same capacity for love, for jealousy, for generosity, for cruelty, that existed in that small band exists in us today. We have not evolved beyond these feelings. We have merely placed them in a vastly more complex world. This is perhaps the most profound connection we share with those deep-time ancestors. We are linked to them not just by the physical DNA that shapes our bodies, but by the emotional DNA that shapes our inner lives. They wondered about their place in the world. They feared the unknown. They cherished their children, and they sought meaning in the face of a vast and often indifferent universe. Just as we do, their world, for all its immense differences, was nonetheless a world of laughter around the fire. It was a world of shared silence under the moon. It was a world of tears shed for a loved one who would not return from the hunt. It was a world of courage in the face of the terrifying dark, and of hope renewed with every rising sun. So as we turn away from the past and back toward our own time, we carry with us not just knowledge, but a deepened empathy. We are not looking back at primitive strangers. We are looking back at ourselves, stripped of all our modern infrastructure, revealed in our most essential form, vulnerable, intelligent, social, and spiritual creatures, trying to make a life in a mysterious world. The story of humanity before the cities is, therefore, not just a history lesson. It is a mirror. It shows us what we have gained in our long journey, the security, the art, the knowledge, the comfort, and it also hints at what we may have lost: the deep, ingrained connection to the natural world, the profound intimacy of small community, the visceral understanding of where our food and water come from, the constant, daily reminder of our place within, not above, the web of life. Their time is gone. The great herds of mammoths are dust. The green Sahara is a desert. The forests they knew have risen and fallen many times over, but the whisper of their lives remains. It is in the wind that moves through the leaves of the oldest trees. It is in the urge to look up at the night sky and feel wonder. It is in the simple, unspoken comfort of sharing a meal with those we love. Their story is our story. It is the first chapter, and it informs every chapter that has followed. And as we close this book, we can do so with a nod of recognition and respect to those who came before, who walked the path so that we might run, who lit the first fires in the darkness so that we might one day learn to harness the light.